Now back in 1937, a guy from Minnesota moves up to Canada and opens a lodge on the Nipigon River. Now the Nipigon River already had a reputation for having huge brook trout. In fact, in 1915, a guy by the name of Dr. J.W. Cook was on a 7-day float trip down the Nipigon in a section called the Rabbit Rapids, caught a 34.5-inch, 14.5-pound brook trout. Now that brook trout was a world record back then, and it's still a world record today. Hello everybody, welcome to Savage Flies. I'm Matt, thanks for stopping by. So this lodge owner I'm talking about up on the Nipigon River was none other than Don Gapen. And we've talked about Don Gapen and some of his flies on this channel before. We tied a variant of his Spitfire just a couple weeks ago, and we tied the Thief, which his son actually created, and it's a variant of what is undoubtedly Don Gapen's most famous fly, the Muddler Minnow. Now I'm going to tie another variant of that one today. It's called the Marabou Muddler, and its primary difference, other than no turkey wing, it's got a marabou wing, is the body. It doesn't have a flat silver tinsel, it's got a silver cactus chenille. And one more interesting fact on Don Gapen's original Muddler Minnow is he didn't trim the heads like we do today. He tied it as just a big, buggy deer hair head and left it. So most historians think he tied this pretty much just to imitate the sculpins. Now today we will fish it weighted and still fish it to imitate the sculpins, but we also fish it sometimes with a little bit of floatant on the surface as a big hopper or terrestrial pattern. And sometimes we'll fish it on the surface, but without any floatant, so it'll just sink a little bit, and then we've got a drown hopper. Now it's not the easiest pattern to tie, so if you tie this and it doesn't look perfect, so don't sweat it, just keep practicing. Eventually you'll get the hang of it. So it's a pretty cool fly. I think you're gonna like it. Let's give it a shot. So there's one in the vise, a Marabou Muddler. Now if you'll notice, this head is not perfect, not even close. We want it to be more of a cone. So we'll see if we can get it right on this one we're about to tie. I'm starting this with a size 6 streamer hook. This is actually a 5X long. And we're gonna have to use some pretty thick thread because we are spinning deer hair. This is a 210 denier. Now this fly would probably look better with a light tan or even a white thread, but I didn't have any real light colors in 210. So one of the first rules of fly tying, you go with what you got. In my case, it's a black, and it'll work just fine. So now we're going to tie in the tail, and the pattern calls for just small tips of red hackle, and I didn't have any really good red hackle. All I have is this strung marabou, so I do the best I can here. I've got 2 little slips, 2 tips, and they should look fine. So we're going to tie it in about a hook gap. It's a pretty good sized tail. Okay, just make sure they're coming off the top right there. I think that's going to be fine. A couple extra wraps right here. Now we've got this cactus chenille. So this is one of the cool things about a Marabou Muddler is this body. You don't have the flat mylar silver tinsel like the regular Muddler Minnow, which, you know, is a little bit more challenging to tie. So this cactus chenille, if you've never used this, give it a shot. It's pretty cool stuff. I tied a bug not too long ago. I think it was called the cactus bug. There's a video of it, and I've got some links in there where you can get this stuff if you don't have any. I mean, you can get it from pretty much your regular fly tying store, but you can also find it on Amazon for a good bit cheaper. So just wrap this up here, pretty much touch and turns with this thread core. Spin it around a little bit, just make sure you're getting some this cactus-like flash coming off. That's what makes it look really cool. And just take it all the way up to, you know, almost a little bit more than 2/3, I'd say. Okay, I think that's going to be fine right there. That might be a little farther. Let's back one of those off and catch this off with 2 turns here. So remember, we've got a wing and a topping and then a spun deer hair head. So we got a lot going on up front. So for the wing, white marabou. That's what gives it its name. So a small tuft of this right here. This is probably a little more than I need, so I'm going to pull a little bit of that out and maybe just leave one middle clump of that right there. I think this is going to be good. So let's go ahead and snip this excess off before we try to tie this in. Okay, and I'm going to wet my fingers so I can get the length right. So you do that right there, and now the length, about almost to the end of the tail, maybe not quite. So let's go ahead and tie it right here. Won't take too many turns, and you don't really want to use too many turns with this really thick thread. So I think 2 is going to catch that in right there. Let's go ahead and snip this excess off. Go ahead and spin 1 or 2 more wraps right there. That's fine. Now we've got a topping. Just about 3 or 4 strands of peacock herl. I'm going to go ahead and snip the ends so they're even. And you don't need to use your best herl for this. You can use some of the thin ones. See, I got a couple of thin ones in there, and they're going to be just fine. So I will do this just a little bit longer than my wing right there, than the marabou. Let's go ahead and catch this in. All right, that's going to look good right there. Snip that off, but save these pieces because that's plenty enough for your next fly. But what I do before going on to the deer hair, I will bend these peacock herls. So I just pull up the herl, not the marabou, put my bodkin under it, and then hold my thumb down and then just pull it up like this. Now I get that natural curve to it. Well, not natural curve, it's a forced curve I kind of put into it. So I think that looks a little bit better, and believe it or not, that curve will stay a pretty long time. So now we're ready for the deer hair. And this is where the fly gets hard and it gets easy to mess up. So if you've got spinning deer hair, that's obviously the best, because it's coarse, it's hollow, it's pretty thick, and it'll spin pretty well. And you're going to need a pretty big chunk for this first one. We're going to have to spin 2 chunks on here. So what I'll do, I will take a chunk and then kind of spin it around and just judge the diameter of that little rope I've created to be about a hook gap. So then put that in your stacker. And then let's see how this turned out. That's going to be, the tips are even enough on that. So we're going to lay this on to where you want the back of this collar to be. So not really too far back. See, about right there. Then you got to switch hands with it. I've got some loose ones right there, and I'm going to kind of put it on the far side of the hook. And it's a very loose wrap at first. And then, see, okay, that's going to look fine, I think. And then the second wrap is just a little bit tighter, let it spin around, and the third wrap is tighter yet. So now I'm pretty much spun it around the whole hook. And I'm going to take a couple of zigzagging wraps up through here while I pull this back and take my thread, just get it up in the front of the hook, kind of out of the way right here. So I'm trying not to trap too many of these fibers, but all right, my thread's out of the way. Now we need to push it back, really compact it. If you've got this tool right here, this is called a hair, not a hair stacker, just a hair pusher, I guess. See, it's got the little holes on it so that you can put it around the hook. But just, you got to be careful if you're doing this so you don't nick your thread. Just kind of put it on there and then push it back. Now you can do the same thing with your fingernails, but this little tool does make it a little bit easier. Just got to be careful and not snip any of your deer hair like I did right there. Now let's do the same thing, but this piece maybe just a little bit less than we did that first one. Okay, so after you've gotten your next piece, and pull out all the under fur right there if you've got any loose fluff. This time though, we don't need to worry about aligning those tips. So we're just going to kind of catch it in right at the middle, at the midpoint of this. Same thing we did before, a loose wrap right there, and then a tighter wrap as we go around. and let it spin all the way around. Now these are a big buggy mess, but you know, deer hair flies usually are. So same thing, let's kind of zigzag this through right here and get our thread up to the front. You know, maybe one wrap right there, and I'm just going to push this back with my finger, really just to give me room for a head here, a whip finish. So what, that should be enough right there. And I try, you have to be careful or you're going to trap some of these fibers right here. Might be a good time to do a hand whip finish, or just if you're dexterous enough, with your whip finish tool, kind of hold it back with your material hand and then work it around it. So I think I got a 4-turn in right there, and that's going to be fine because we'll put a smallest drop of head cement on here before we're done. Just going to reach in here. I'm not going to snip it. I'm going to just kind of saw the thread off right there. And now here comes the fun part. So it's a big buggy mess right now. You can do the rest with scissors if you need to, or a razor blade, single edge, double edge razor blade. I have this pretty nifty little Stanfo tool, and it's got, you know, you twist it, and how tight you twist it will tell you how much of a bend you put in it. So here's the goal. Just try to get a little bit of a tapered head right here, and just, you know, have at it, but do it a little bit at a time because you can always go back and take off more. If you take off too much, you'll never be able to put it back till the next fly. So just take your time here and try to trim up your head. Okay, well, it's still not a perfect cone head, but maybe we can just keep at it a little bit till we make it a little bit more of a cone, or just live with what you got and put it in your box. So there we go, a basic Marabou Muddler. You know, not any easier to tie, not really any harder to tie than the standard Muddler Minnow, but a pretty cool, pretty effective pattern. So that's it, my friends. I appreciate you watching. Y'all take care, and we'll see you next time.